Winston, I wanted to ask you, so it was wonderful to see a man who has a commanding presence in this, but also in this kind of fun-loving dad role, right? I mean, which for me felt very familiar. It was wonderful, but also sort of surprising. It was a surprise element, something you're used to seeing and knowing in your life, but you rarely see that sort of on screen. So I wanted to ask you sort of, we're often used to seeing, you know, men, African-American men or black men with physical prowess in these different roles, superheroes or villains. But what was it like for you to play, at least as Gabriel, the fun-loving character? What was that experience like?
Well, it was a great question. Thanks for having us. A really strong part of what Jordan Peele does is he loves taking things that we find familiar and turning it on its head. Am I right? From Five on It and turning that into something just...
I would never hear that song in the same
creepy, you know? Powerful. And what we wanted to do, we had conversations about just changing how we look at masculinity in film. Taking something that feels incredibly familiar, like the sitcom dad, and all these, you know, to some degree, respectability politics dads and performances, and turning it into something that says something. So taking figures that feel like Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince, or taking, you know, even Homer Simpson, or, you know, that Seaver dad from Growing Pains. And, you know, because the thing about Gabe Wilson is he also performs, to some degree, a veneer of whiteness. Right?
Okay.
And, oh, it's starting to be like church up in here.
Well, I will ask you to expound upon that. What do you mean by that?
He performs, it's a bit of a veneer of whiteness because he's really attached to the construct of the American dream. He really defines himself in his possessions, right? He defines himself in the home, in the car, in the trophy family. He really defines himself in his possessions. And we wanted to take something that felt really familiar so the audience could find it palatable. And then you get home and you go, that actually doesn't feel right in my stomach, right? That character who doesn't listen, is that really the all-American dad, right? The father who doesn't listen, the husband who isn't really a partner, is that the all-American dad?
Well, I feel attacked. I feel attacked.
You know, and that's the thing about Gabe Wilson, is that we were flipping a lot of things, and we're aware that we were flipping a lot of things. But there's great duality, you know, in Gabe Wilson as well. Because even though he is this character who is defined by like patriarchy and is the head of the family and I must be listened to until he isn't listened to, he's also defined in action that isn't your typical male in film. He's not your typical black male in film. He's not your typical male in cinema. He is not stoic and uncommunicative. He is overly communicative. He can be a bit sexy. He can be... Yes! Y'all are gonna create a monster. But he can be funny. And he can be so many things at once, and he can be self-defining to some degree, and he can change.
And so how was it playing a character that sort of complex and familiar, yet unfamiliar for, you know, sort of the history of cinema, and, you know, coming off of the great ride of being in Black Panther? What was it like in terms of your preparation process?
That's all the checklist. And here comes the next one.
I think the major thing that we end up doing and that keeps them very similar, both Black Panther and now Us and Get Out was similar in the same way, was that it's a conversation. It's a conversation with culture. It's a conversation with ourselves. It's a conversation with our aspirations of who we want to be. So that's the hard thing. That was the thing that we, I think, got into this job and this project to do, you know? Have the conversations about who we are, what are our attachments, what are we now responsible for as a result of those attachments, you know?
So it was sort of like an arc, if you will, in terms of your roles and the characters. I have to wrap it up and get to some questions from the audience, but one of the extra characters that I thought seemed to play so prominently was the music in this, you know. So you have, as you said, 5 on it, a danceable song that now I will never be able to hear the same way. Even, you know, the Black Swan, that scene, Nutcracker, this is the song that we know. But when you have Fuck the Police in there, I kept asking myself when I'm watching it, like, 14 minutes, when are they ever going to come? And then you have this song, and I'm like, okay, there's something here that we are hearing in terms of the music.
Y'all late as hell, man. Oh yeah, I forgot.
Where the music and the sounds play.
Oh, y'all late as hell, man. Oh yeah, college students. Yeah, hit y'all later.
The sound of the music, that's 50% of what we experience
exactly
when we watch a film. And, you know, I think it's hard to intellectualize each and every choice, because on a certain point, you know, when it works, it works. You know, music tends to be there. Score is there to underline emotion. You know, the same image can mean 2 different things with 2 different scores. You know, when I use these pop culture kind of iconic tracks, you know, part of my desire is exploring this idea of duality and bringing a new meaning, you know, showing the underbelly of something that is popular and that has this, you know, a positive connotation to us already. So that, you know, when I do the needle drops, like even the Beach Boys, Good Vibrations, the Minnie Riperton song at the end, La Fleur, it's all about taking these anthems of good feeling and ruining them.